Welcome to Ming Presents The Re-Up, a conversation with the artistic mind.
Oh! you went all the way and you decided to do to get the vinyl shot.
Yeah, I mean, it was the best background in my studio. So
it looks like a Zoom background at this point. I don't even have any of my vinyl anymore. I got rid of it all.
Really?
Yeah, when my girlfriend and I we got rid of the place, the Hell's Kitchen place, and we were moving into our own new apartment. This is way back. I didn't want to bring all that vinyl with me. I was like, I'm done with this. I'm using all the digital stuff anyway. So
I hear that. This is actually more
soundproofing.
Exactly. It's like a diffuser in the back of my room because my speaker's on the other end.
That's kind of what I was using that stuff for too. It's funny. It's a good use when you can use it for that. So what's been up, man? How you been?
Good. Yeah, I don't know. Just life.
Yeah. Well, you're like many of us who work from home, right? You have your studio at home, and even though you're connected with you should talk a little bit about the Steve Stout stuff, like that whole situation. But I've known you since way back in the day, Daddy's house. Is that where I met you?
Yeah, we met through John Eaton.
That's right. Yeah. Have you seen John at all?
I see him on Facebook occasionally. I run into him every once in a while. He's still doing his thing, I guess.
It's funny to think about John Eaton. So my just a little backstory for everybody. My studio with Fred, when it was Ming and FS, we were on 43rd Street between 9th and 10th. And in that area, the Hell's Kitchen area, somehow it seemed to be sort of an area where there was tons of studios. And when you first got there, we had no idea. This is just where I have my joint. You worked at Daddy's house, which was on 44th between 8th and 9th.
Yeah.
And it wasn't eventually Wyclef's studio. Was that on 45th or 47th?
I've been there. I forget what year, but there were so many studios. There was a place directly...
The Film Center.
Yeah, the Film Center. Yeah, that on 30th.
That was on 9th Avenue between 44th and 44th and 45th.
Oh, right. Yeah. And no, I forget. I think was it called Sound on Sound? There was a studio direct behind Daddy's house, like on 45th, I guess, but like almost butting up against it. I feel like there were other studios in that building as well. And then, of course, Quad is right by there.
And then Sony was above that. And then there was Criteria. All those. Maybe it was the Hit Factory.
Sony and the Hit Factory are on the same block on 54th. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You know that the Hit Factory is now some luxury apartments, but they call it like the Rock and Roll Apartments or something.
Well, you know where the Hit Factory was? I think it was the Sony Studios / Hit Factory. There was I used to do events in there. That space turned into something else. And I was doing a networking event there called 20.20. And I think it was in the old space. It was in the old Hit Factory space. And they were using it as I know what it was. Sony turned it into a writer's room, like a performance center. So if you were a Sony published artist, you would go I'm going to be in town. I want to do a writing session. You'd go use one of their rooms. And I think it was the old Hit Factory.
Gotcha. Yeah, Sony was on the corner and Hit Factory was kind of on the other side of the street in mid block, but they were right on.
Yeah, that's exactly what's up. So speaking of Daddy's house, kind of funny to go all the way back there. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about working as an engineer, like the whole backstory with working for Puffy, because our entrance into that whole area was so weird. It was John Eaton. Yeah. He wanted us to do some remixes, which is how we got in there doing, I think it was a Biggie Smalls. You guys that remix? What was it?
Wasn't it Benjamin's remix?
Yeah, the Benjamin's remix, right. We did that. And then because of the weird thing about the white guys in Daddy's house, there's that it's like Puffy basically had all, just a bunch of white dudes doing all the engineering.
Yeah.
So we were kind of it's funny. It's like all the creative guys, the writers, the players, but then the engineers and I guess remixers and stuff like that. And then John Eaton, because they had that rock band. What was the rock band?
Yeah, so John Eaton was like he was an A&R guy there, but he was like he was like the alternative guy. So anybody that was anything that wasn't R&B or hip hop, he dealt with the rock, he dealt with the drum and bass, he dealt with, But it's interesting because in John Eaton's office, he was like, you know, he was definitely the outlier there. But the people that interned for him was like, well, my boy Damon Eden. I don't know if you know him. He went on to be a big A&R guy. What's his name? John Shapiro, Johnny Shipes, who, you know, huge mogul now. He was like John Eaton's intern at Bad Boy.
Yeah, it's funny. Bad Boy had that a little bit of that. You know, at the Apollo when you rub that wooden thing. Yeah. Bad Boy was a little bit like that. It was a really weird place. Well, the studio was not the label, but the studio was just odd.
Right.
Because a lot of really nice people. It was just always odd. When I was there, I always just never knew like what I was like trying to do my thing and trying to meet people. Yeah. And I remember one time I was in the elevator and it was Puffy. I want to say Mace, but I'm not 100% sure if my memory serves me correctly. And the drummer from Motley Crue, what's his name? Oh, Tommy Lee.
Tommy Lee, I met him there as well. Yeah.
So I'm in the elevator with the three of them, and of course, you know, like I'm in there doing work stuff that's related to you know Puffy, but I'm not gonna say, yo, what's up? I'm working on this, whatever. Because he's like having a conversation, and Tommy just is like cheesing at me, and he just leans over and he's like, "I'm Tommy."
Yeah, yeah.
He sticks his hand out. He's the nicest dude ever. I'm like, I know you're Tommy Lee, dude. Like,
I just saw this sex tape last week. That was right at that time too, because I remember when I saw that Puff walked him through and introduced him to me, and I remember that was the first thing that went through my mind. I was like, oh yeah, I just saw that sex tape.
I didn't even think about that. I just thought about how nice he was. Like Motley Crue during their time, I mean, they were basically rock gods, metal gods. You know what I mean? Like if you were into that hair metal thing, Motley Crue wasn't a heavy band, but it was definitely like, you know, girls and guys loved Motley Crue, so they were mad famous. And for him to just be in that elevator with these like hip hop moguls and him as this like wild out there drummer to be so friendly, I was like, I want to be like this guy. This guy's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Talk a little bit about being at Daddy's house, because I know you used to tell me these great stories about how you started ordering, you know, doing the track orders.
No, well, so here's my experience with Bad Boy. Really, I never worked for Daddy's house. The only people that really worked at Daddy's house were the assistant engineers and the studio management. You know what I mean? And then, so the way I got involved with Bad Boy, I actually went on tour with Bad Boy though on the first in '98, the No Way Out tour, which was basically right after Biggie died. Puffy had just gotten super famous and he had started rapping, and they also had the whole label. You know what I mean? Like all the artists. So I went on that tour as a roadie, and yeah, I was like setting up the turntables for Clark Kent and the stuff for Stevie J. And as soon as I got out there, they asked me, Stevie J was supposed to run the show. They had ADATs on stage, and he's like, I'm not. So he's like, you got to do that. So I've been all the music other than what they were playing over it was coming out of this ADAT rig that I was sitting on the side of the stage watching for cues, you know. And my friend Michael Patterson was making the show tape in the studio bus. Sometimes during the first set, he'd be handing me the VHS tapes because it's ADAT.
I remember.
And I'd have to like have the cue points and program them into the BRC. And then by the time the second set came up, yeah, that was pretty nerve wracking. But as a result of that, I met Michael Patterson and we got to be good friends. And he was like, at the time I was living in LA, and he's like, move to New York. Cause I mean, that's a whole other story, LA. But, I came out to New York, and the first thing the job that I got really with Puff was he was starting his second album, Forever, and they brought me in to collect samples, like not samples like loops, but like drum hits and, you know, drum samples and just different samples for dudes to load into MPC. So like the first, I don't know how many months of my job was just like, I mean, there's a hard drive with thousands of kicks, thousands of snares labeled like a dirty kick 13, you know what I mean? Like, So that's how I started. And honestly, I never really engineered. I did a little engineering for Puff because he ended up just getting to know me. And I literally I'd never used Pro Tools when I started there. I was using Digital Performer. I had learned audio, or like digital audio, on Sound Designer 2, if you remember that.
Yeah, I used Digital Performer 2 back in the day as well. So it's funny.
So that was like, and I just couldn't afford Pro Tools. You needed to buy, I think. So when I first started, they were like, you should definitely learn this Pro Tools, because that was when they were one of the first hip hop labels to start using it and not using 2-inch. And I just learned it as part of chopping up samples for this library. And then at one point, I think Puff asked me to help him edit. I think it was the music video for Public Enemy 2000, and they did a dance break in the middle where it broke down and was like, it's like some old school, what is it, like Planet Rock comes in and he does like a dance break and then it goes back into the song. I'm not sure if that was the time, but I remember sitting with Puff and editing something, and he was like, "Oh, you're that dude," or whatever. And I literally had Pro Tools, and then he starts asking me to, like, every album sequence from the next like 4 years at the end of every project. Oh, that's the thing too. He asked me to go to Europe with him to sequence that album, because the deadline, they were like past the deadline, and he had to go do some press in England, and he's like, just come with me. I swear it's only going to be a couple days. We'll knock this out. Blah, blah, blah. I go there, it's Pro Tools rig and everything set up in this hotel room in London. That was wild too. And we never did anything. I was set up and he was partying, and there was all these, we'd go to these clubs, and it was like wild. Well, Do Not Disturb is not working, but
yeah, I noticed that mine's not working either, so whatever.
Okay, it doesn't matter. So we ended up not getting it done in the time that he had in London, except the last night we were there, he's like, we end up working, and we got through like halfway through the album. He's like, I got to go to Paris tomorrow. It's Fashion Week. You got to come with me. I promise this is going to be like a day.
You're like, dude, I'll go with you to Fashion Week if the party's going to continue like this and I'm getting paid.
Exactly.
You get paid?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I went to Paris and sat around, and this was like Paris hotel rooms where the hotels are only like 7 stories tall, right? Because everything's a certain height. And so on the top level, it was like the suite, and then the room right next to it is supposed to be security or something. So he just gave me that room, and I had the Pro Tools set up in there. And again, it was like a week of nothing really happening. Sometimes he'd like bring some people in my room and be like, yo, play them this, play them that, whatever. But we didn't do anything until the last night I was there, and then we finished the album sequence. And I think in the meantime, I was probably building like interludes on my own time when he was out doing whatever he was doing. Like, so certain, and probably a lot of it never even got used, but it would be like, and there'd be an idea, and he'd like put all the sound effects together so it's like in a phone bank, and then, but I don't know.
I remember you telling me he flew you out to the Hamptons once, just like
on a helicopter.
On a helicopter, because he wanted you to sequence some record, and I was like, I get it. People get superstitious, and also, I think I tell people this about the music industry. It's like, if you can be a capable human being, and you can turn a I don't know into I'll figure it out without having to say anything, and you can orchestrate what needs to happen. That's what I consider to be a producer. That's why I'm a good producer, is because I don't need somebody to tell me, figure this out. I hear the problem and I say, okay, can I figure this out before they know that I'm figuring it out, or in a way that will serve them, so they'll, and so a lot of people, even to this day, call me for all kinds of things because I'm a problem solver.
Right.
It doesn't even matter what it is. They'll just call me because I can figure it out. And half the time I'm like, did you Google that? But because, back in the day, we couldn't do that, right? You call your other engineer friends, or you would do, you would do whatever. But I always saw you as sort of like a Swiss Army knife like that too. Your career and your pathway has been sort of a pathway of, yes, I can do that, or I can do this better than you can, so I can just get by. And then, I learn and learn and learn, right?
Yeah, I feel like that describes every gig I ever do, to some degree. And it's really just having that skill. No excuses. unless like something breaks or something. But you figure out ways of solving the problems, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, a producer solves audio problems, but when you're a tech, you're solving other problems. I think touring is a good. I never really mentioned this before, and I don't know how you ended up on the road. You should talk about how you ended up on that tour. But touring is a really good place to understand that there's no is not the answer. You can't remain on tour with somebody and be utilitarian on a tour because every second of everyone's time is being paid for, and be like, that's not my job. Your job is to just make sure the show happens and that nobody knows that everything up until that moment was totally, completely fucked. And maybe the whole entire show was fucked, except as long as the audience doesn't know.
Right.
And like you describing Michael Patterson handing you off stuff and you're still programming it before the show. Like I've been through that situation. Like Fred and I, when we were on tour, we would literally get to a club in some random town and the sound system would be a mess. And they wouldn't be used to having DJs there. And we would literally rewire the sound. Someone tried to call me there, and even though I have Do Not Disturb on, it just, I don't know. Tried to hit me during sound, like we would fix it during sound check. And then people would be like, why does your set sound so much better? This club never sounds like this. It's like, yeah, because we couldn't play like that.
Right.
It sounded like death. We do a sound check. It was like, this is horrible. We have to fix this.
Wow. The fact that you do that says a lot. That you could you knew what to do. Because it's weird. I've actually run sound on certain shows, and I don't know if we want to talk about Prince, but like.
Yeah, no, I 100% want to talk about Prince because I was thinking about Prince the other day. I was like, what would he be doing during quarantine? And because he required so many people to be available for him at the drop of a dime, what would this mean for him? But let's get back to that in a second.
Yeah. No, but I've run sound at shows before, and it's like I really don't know what I'm doing in that realm. Like something starts feeding back, like I know I would turn it down, but like the EQing for feedback for monitors and all that stuff, like there's so much that goes into all that. Yeah, I feel, and to go back to what you said about being a Swiss Army knife, I feel like I can figure out how to solve problems in so many different ways. But like, if you really get down to it, like an engineer, like a recording engineer, I don't really know the SSL in and out like that. Like I definitely don't know live sound, and I've done it though because
100%. I've done live sound as well, and I recently did a rock EP where I was in a room tracking drums, and they had there was a console in there, and I hired Mario McNulty to be the engineer because I was like, I can use the console, but I don't want to be in there sweating as the producer. Like I don't want to have to be like I don't know the console well enough to be as good as I am as a producer. So I brought him in to be the engineer, and he because that's what he works on every day.
Right.
And there's like when you work on something enough, it becomes second nature. You're not looking for the button. You're not looking for the right. That's what you want to do in a professional setting. But, what you just said about if something starts feeding back and you pull the fader down, there are many people who just back away from the console and be like, I don't know what's going on. I can't fix it.
Or you push that one button that starts it to feedback and you don't know how to, like, you put something into input, it starts feeding back, and you hit the space bar and it starts playing and you can't stop it. So it just keeps going. Yeah.
Yeah, but you just, like some people wouldn't stop. And actually, that is the way that you deal with feedback is you pull the fader down first so that it stops feeding back. And then what's happening is that frequency is resonating through the system and getting picked up by the microphone. So you've got to dial that frequency back, and you got to do it carefully so that you don't make it sound like whatever. But that's when you bring out a microphone in monitors, what you're doing is you're sweeping the microphone in front of the monitors to find out what frequencies are going to cause feedback. And then you use a notch filter or a parametric EQ to push down those frequencies. That's all you're doing. It's not like rocket science. It just takes time and patience. And if you don't know that.
Like, yeah, and you have to, like, I watch these dudes in Japan at Budokan ring out the monitors, and they're like, they're not like check 1, 2. They go over there, they're like, ooh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh, and they find these frequencies doing that, and then they know where they are on the.
One thing that I can say is, as a touring musician or anybody who's ever traveled to Japan, playing in Japan was the most unbelievable experience because people take their jobs so seriously. Let me tell you this. I'll digress real quick. We're playing Mount Fuji. We get to Mount Fuji. We're on this deep concentration tour. The guys set up our equipment. There's a bunch of dudes watching us. And like with Ming and FS, it was very particular because we were playing with 4 decks, going into a mixer. We had 2 mixers in between the decks. We were playing live bass and guitar. There was a whole rig, and we didn't expect. I mean, it was like our own cut and paste rig. No one was touring like that.
Right.
It wasn't like guitar, bass, drums, whatever, or just one set of turntables. We set up. They do the sound check. It's great. Everyone's very, very nice to us. And then they come in and they kind of usher us away. And we're like looking at them like, what the fuck are you doing? And they start taking it apart. And we're like, what the fuck? We just spent all this time, sound checking and putting all the shit together. They take everything apart. They mark everything on the stage. They break it down. And when we come back to play, it's perfect.
Wow. Well, tell you.
No one does that. No one breaks down your gear for you and resets it up before, unless you've been on tour with a team that's done this practice. They were so on point professional. I was like, this is why things in Japan are the way that they are, because people take the simplest job, even if it's serving tea on a train. They take it very seriously and they do it with respect, and everyone respects them doing it. Americans could really learn something about that part of like everybody has a place to play in society. No one's lower than someone else. And that was an amazing aspect of Japan where we were like, holy cow, I can't believe they just reset up our gear with tape and,
Yeah. Wait, Americans need to learn about respect? What? No, when I was at Budokan, we had like multiple nights in a row. I was there with Prince in 96, I believe. And we set up and like all the equipment's on stage and his 2 cymbal guitars, his bass and his hollow body are sitting there in front of his Marshall or in front of his stacks. They put, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 armed guards just sitting there next to his guitars the entire night, overnight. Yeah. They weren't going
to take a chance.
Yeah. I don't know why.
That's what I'm talking about. It's like on another level of, it's like they're thinking beyond, we would be like, it's their problem.
Right.
They're thinking, we could never have this happen.
Right.
This could never happen.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing mentality. So you're at Daddy's house. You become his, basically, I don't know, how many albums did you order for them? Sequence,
a lot. Like everything from the Forever album, which I think was 2000, I guess.
Do you get any platinum plaques for sequencing an album?
I could have got it. I did scratching on those albums too. So
yeah,
and drum programming, and I produced the intro to one of the G-Dep album. I could have got some plaques. I think back, I don't know, like I fucked up and let that time go. I really wish I had a plaque for the Notorious K.I.M. album, Lil' Kim. I did a bong hit on one of the songs.
Oh, did you?
But I also did scratching on 2 of the songs.
That's like some Blessed the Nation shit right there. Bong hit on Lil' Kim's album.
It says sound effects, I think, but I know that's me.
Yeah, they always call it sound effects.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But no, I never got any plaques. I should have. I did a beat on a Method Man album that went gold. And I never got a plaque. I don't know if they even made plaques because they probably saw that as like a failure. Because remember, at that point in the early 2000s, like if you went gold and you were a platinum artist, you didn't make it. You're getting dropped.
I mean, I think that in hip hop, which was a little bit different than, let's say, the rock stuff, and also because it was at Daddy's house. In Daddy's house, there was a lot of, there was crews and there was a lot of people around, and no one was ever like. I think Michael Patterson was probably. Puffy would be like, "Who played on this record?" Like the engineers knew more than I think everybody knew who exactly got credits on everything. And I think because there were so many people around.
What's that?
I think because there were so many people around and you were part of the sauce that they just didn't credit you because you would have got a plaque if you were a part of the liner notes.
Edited on everything. I mean,
so go get your plaques then. What's up?
No, I know, but I waited too long. And I think at the time it was like they would give plaques to all the main people, like the producers who did the beats. And there's so many people though involved in these records. So
I know.
the label has to pay for those plaques. So they're going to give all the feature artists and the artists and the producers plaques. Anybody else could pay like $300 and get their plaque. But and also at that time, like I had really started to dig in with the Blestination stuff. So I wasn't working for Puff and all that stuff like full time. I just worked enough to pay my rent, to have my own studio and work on my own thing, to try to develop my own thing. So at the time I probably didn't have the extra $300 every time one of those records came out, which I, looking back at it, I should definitely have plaques. Some of those records, even at the time, because I kind of had an attitude similar to like you guys, like, oh, this is commercial, whatever. Nowadays, if I DJ, like that Bad Boy shit is like,
well, now it's yeah, that's a funny.
It's better than anything else that is coming out now in terms of getting a party going. All those Bad Boy records, they sound amazing, and all the stuff that we didn't like about it back then
sounds great now.
Great. Yeah, I think it's kind of like people liking hair metal after the fact too.
Yeah, I think that the one of the things that sonically, even though we saw it as a little bit cheesy, because we were, the underground is what motivates creative people, I think, and we saw that as like a total sellout and kind of cheese. But the records were still made very well, and they were made through nice consoles, and they were engineered by good engineers, and there was thought put into them, and there's reasons why they sold millions and millions and millions of copies. We just, I think, as artistic people, saw them as cheese or shit sandwiches. But the reality is and we were also young. And so when you're younger, I think you look at music as like this pure, there's like levels of purity. But what you don't realize is that music is just supposed to make you feel something, whether it's good, bad, pretty, ugly, or whatever. And when you get older and your perspective changes in the terms of like, you're more accepting of all kinds of different things because life is more like that. That you look back at those records and you reminisce a little bit, but you're like, yeah, man, those were good records because they are good records. And I just was being too nearsighted to allow myself, because also the cliques that you're in, you're like, it becomes like a cliquey thing. Like you're down with like Mobb Deep and whatever. You're not going to be down with. It's just that's the immature way of looking at music. But
it's funny because the last album I worked on with Puff was the Press Play album, and that was like right when Blestination got signed. So he asked me to like basically be the engineer on the thing just because he wanted me to be there or whatever. Meaning like engineering his vocals, which is. That's a whole thing unto itself. Like, working with people that are naturally great artists that just do one take, like Wordplay and Various as an example. But those guys, 2-3 takes maximum. Like anything beyond that, it's not going to be good anyway. But then you got an artist like Puff where the rhymes are written and they're sometimes done by committee, and sometimes there's 30 people in the room giving comments or whatever. But anyway, the Press Play album, he was having Pharoah Monch, Mos Def, Black Thought, Talib Kweli write his lyrics. And it was like exactly what you're talking about. Because it's funny listening to podcasts now and hearing the stories of back then of like Puff showing up at, like Puff would show up at Wetlands and like such and such had said some shit on like the Roots. Remember the Roots did that video where they dissed all the like bling bling shit, and then like Puff went to see someone at Wetlands, and I forget, he ran into somebody, and it was like a whole situation. But then like it's just a couple years later, Jay-Z name drops Talib Kweli and Common, and all of a sudden like Puff is like, let me get Pharoah Monch to write these lyrics, and crazy. The funny thing is one day, and like literally I was on those sessions, and then we got the call, like we got to go to LA to meet with Interscope tomorrow. I had to like cancel one day and go, and we got our record deal with Blestination. So I kind of got off that thing. But so I only did a few sessions for that album, but the one session, it was a Pharoah Monch verse, and Puff like couldn't even figure out like, I mean, no disrespect to Puff, because he's a fucking really smart guy and a really good producer. But he couldn't understand exactly what Pharoah was saying, like, lyrically. He just didn't get the one metaphor. It was something about I remember that it was a metaphor for doing pull-ups on the don't walk sign,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't remember what the line was. But he's like, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh, he's talking about doing the pull-ups and the thing or whatever. But I remember there's one line in that song, and Pharoah Monch's flow is crazy, right? It's not 16th notes. It's not just regular. And I remember Puff like had a really tough time on this one line. And also, to preface this story, Puffy knew that I was into underground shit. He knew I was making drum and bass, and that I liked hip hop that was all samples and grimy and like Wu-Tang and shit. So we're sitting there, and he was having a tough time getting this one line, and he said it, and I went on the talk back, and I was like, yo, that was dope. And he goes, wait, did y'all get that on camera? Did y'all? What? You said that you said I was dope. Yeah.
I love it.
Self-aware too. Like Puff would laugh at himself. He knew he would look at you. I can't even describe, but he would do this thing where he would look at you and have this smile on his face. He's like, you see what I'm getting away with right here? You know what I mean? Like he totally knew the whole thing. It wasn't
he was. I mean, look, you were in there with him, and we didn't like again, it was like anti what we were doing, but we got it, and we got the genius of it. What we didn't get was people not understanding how dumb the whole thing was. Meaning, like, the genius was that he's like, I'm going to take hits from the 80s. It's one of his raps, and just put rap over hits from the 80s. And I'm going to they're already hits. I'm just going to have enough money to pay for this. It's going to be a hit again. It's the formula. It's working. And he was able to get, I think with his genius of finding people, Biggie, Mary J., all these different really real MCs, real characters, real hip hop artists. Yeah. He had that in him, and he had that like fire, and then he eventually put the coat on himself, because he was like, I got to carry this torch now because I built something up, and no, I can't, like Biggie's gone. I got to, you know what I mean? Like he just knew that, like, and even though it wasn't credible to us, you could tell that he, know what I mean? He
had this swagger. He had the attitude already. It wasn't a matter. It was just that he just wasn't a musician, but he also, like, look at the dude. He did Broadway. He ran the marathon. These are all things people could probably say, like, nah, bro, you can't do that or whatever. And he's like,
I remember when he ran the marathon. The only thing, it's funny, the only thing that I really didn't like, and this is, you probably remember this, because I always tell people about this J-Lo poster when it first came through the studio at Daddy's house. We could talk about that. I use that as a reference, actually, for a lot of young female artists as like what that was. But when what?
What's the poster? I don't remember.
There was like a poster of her on like a bed or on a couch, like in these little shorts with like a wife beater on or something, and she was like really young. She was just drop dead gorgeous, and the posters had come in when we were at Daddy's house, and people were like, "Yo, who's that?" Everyone was like flipping out. They're like, "Yo, that's Daddy's that's J-Lo," and like. But the picture is such an amazing picture of her, because she looks approachable, like a girl next door, but hotter than anything. Right. And when I work with a female artist that's trying to be sexy, I always use that as a reference to be like, look, she doesn't look slutty. She wasn't demeaned in hip hop. She looked like beautiful, and like almost like you would just like, she would just like woke up in the morning and she's sitting on the couch,
right.
Beautiful. And I use that a lot of times to show female artists, like, you don't have to go that other, you can look sexy, but don't have to go that slutty route. If you know what I mean? Like, look at the photo, and it's really good. And I've based photo shoots off of that before. But the one thing that I didn't like was when he was at, what was the club where he got caught with a gun?
Club New York.
Yeah, Club New York. That whole thing for me was like a little too.
With a gun. There was a gun went off. You're talking about the shooting.
But he had a gun that there was a gun that like
something got thrown out the window of the car. Something.
Yeah. I was like, what are you doing? Why are you going down this route? That was like a moment when I think he was going the wrong direction, because he got into that, wanted to be real with the crew, and then it just got too inflated.
Puffy this is not bullshit. Puffy would fucking, Google Puffy punching somebody. He did it a million times. He knocked people out in clubs for saying that don't talk to my girlfriend. And like Puff is fucking real.
No, but I mean, I'm saying like he was at a success point. That was like at this point where he was so successful. I was like, what are you doing? You don't need to touch this. Why are you still going to the club like this? But
Right.
you know, it is the life. It's the life. But
I mean, yeah, that's the lifestyle. It's crazy, man, because the first studio experience I had with Bad Boy, because I went on the road and I was living in LA and I got off the road and I went out to LA under false pretenses. Somebody told me that they were going to hook me up with all this work, and it was actually Randy Jackson from American Idol. He was just bullshitting. And,
you know, that's a common thread that I've heard about Randy, like promise
LA.
the world. What?
LA though.
Yeah, that's LA. That is LA.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah. So then I ended up, I kept in contact with Michael Patterson, and he was like, come to New York. So I came to New York, and the first job that I did with Bad Boy was starting on that album. And we all went to the Bahamas for 3 weeks to just like start that record. Wait, I forget why are we getting on this? What were we talking about just before this?
We were talking about Puffy being real in a club, people getting gangster.
So we went down there, and the book about Death Row had come out.
Right.
It was a Suge Knight book or whatever, and I read that while I was kind of just getting familiar with this whole crew. And I'm reading this Suge Knight book about all the gang members and the violence and forcing people to drink piss and all this stuff. And I was just like, holy shit, what am I getting myself into? And we were recording at Compass Point in the Bahamas. And Suge had just been there like a couple weeks before, and they were telling us stories about having a huge garbage bag full of cash, and that they were like, something happened, and all of a sudden, like, everybody ran and jumped in this van, and they grabbed the garbage bag full of cash, and there was like a situation going down, and it just all sounded like very crazy and a little bit beyond what's necessary to make music. But luckily for me, Bad Boy, I mean, I was around a couple of crazy situations, especially with Shine, but I mean, for the most part, you know, it was just like making music in the studio, smoking weed.
Well, that, you know, Bad Boy is the place where I learned the no guns in the studio. Like, that was a thing. Like, you're not allowed, you know, like no guns in the studio. I remember being there for something, and then like people had taken guns out, like just to put them on the desk. And I was like, yo, I can't be in this room, dude. Like, I'm not.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not hanging out in a room with guns in the studio. Like, oh, and I don't know who was like the assistant engineer. He was like, oh, no, I'm just collecting the guns. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, there's no guns in the studio here. Puffy's going to be here soon. There's no guns in the studio.
Wow.
And he took like 3 or 4, you know, probably like 9mm or whatever, you know, like semi-automatic handguns, and put them in a bag and brought them back to the front desk and put them. And I was like, did that really just happen? And then that became an ongoing like joke. No guns in the studio.
I never saw a lot of guns, to be honest, but one time we were in Atlanta recording at Silent Sound, and there was like the entrance was like a patio deck, and me and Patterson were actually standing outside having some conversation, and CeeLo Green walked out, and he like had a gun in his hand, and he was just like had a big grin on his face, and it was like a I don't know, it was like a joke or something, and I looked over, and yeah, it was just kind of like what the fuck just happened?
I still have that rule. There's no guns in the studio, just so you know, if you want to.
Yeah, me too.
So wait, you where were you in before LA? Were you in Minneapolis? Is that what we? Yeah,
totally. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I lived in Minneapolis from like 19 till 24 or 5 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were at Paisley then.
Yeah, I started as an assistant engineer at another studio in town, and then and I was really into sampling and shit, and this was like early days of all that kind of. So I bought an Emax 2, and I was like chopping things up and making beats and stuff. And but I was hanging out with nobody I was hanging out with was hip hop at all. It was all musicians. So I became the guy that did like the loops and the breaks and shit. And then with Prince, and I was hanging out with Prince's drummer, Michael Bland, a lot. I got to know him because he was like playing with Prince and touring with Prince around the world, but he would also play in bars. And Minneapolis is like just such a dope music scene. So there's a bar called Bunkers that's right outside of town. And I would go there every Sunday or every Monday and Tuesday back then. I think it's Sunday and Monday now. But it was just like this dope cover band that would play old funk songs and soul songs. And like anybody would come and sit in with them. Like Sheila E. would come down. Slash from Guns N' Roses sat in one time. Any number of people. Prince came down there all the time and jammed. Like that's how he met the drummer. But anyway, I got to know this dude and we were making music together. We'd done a couple projects. And then he had a rig, his live rig, it was like a refrigerator sized rack with like a mixer and samplers and a drum machine in it, which was just like an Alesis SR16 triggering. And the guy who was running that had moved on or whatever. So this drummer was like, can you come out to Paisley and load some stuff, like learn my rig and load these new songs? Because basically how they would do it was anytime that Prince had a new song that he wanted to perform live, if it was a live band song, they would just play it. But if it was like an electronic song with a beat, we would go in the studio, pull up the multi-track, just pull up the drums, get a good mix of it, record it to DAT, sample it, and then I would program it into his rig. So he had like next to his kick drum pedal, he had a start-stop button that was like a reconfigured Boss pedal. And it was like old school MIDI stuff. So we had to have boxes like custom made that this box changes program change information into some other sort of information so we can change the drum machine to the right pattern. So he had a Lexicon MRC by him with a list of 50 song titles, and he'd push like 23 enter and it would load like Days of Wild or whatever. So it would load the samples in the drum machine, the samples in the sampler, the drum machine would go to the pattern. And there was a thing too where when you turned the rig on, you had to hold down this one pedal that was gaff taped to the because if you didn't do that, it wouldn't loop. You know what I mean? And you'd have to restart the whole system or whatever. So yeah, it was like crazy. You could do all this in a laptop or like probably some little time, like a phone now. But I would program the beats that they would use live, and dude has photographic memory. So the drummer, so he would remember the tempos. He would just start playing with the thing, and it would be perfect. Like every time.
He didn't even have a click track to like 2, 3, 4.
Nothing. No click track. There were no click tracks because Prince, even though we were using samples and stuff, he didn't, like Janet Jackson was on tour the same time as us and she was using DAT and lip syncing probably. We were on stage at Wembley Arena and he's like dissing Janet Jackson for using a DAT. You know what I mean? Like at every show, he's like, oh, Janet came through here. She used a DAT. You want this? You know what I mean? Like,
No, and I gotta be. I must have seen that tour because I went to a Janet Jackson tour at Madison Square Garden. My sister and my dad. My sister was young and wanted to go see Janet Jackson. My dad was going. He's like, "You should come to this." And of course, I was into metal and hip hop, so I was like, "I don't want to see Janet Jackson." But then I went to the show, and that was like the first eye-opening experience of like, oh, this isn't just like you're not just performing; it's a full show.
Theater.
It was the theater, and so like I didn't have a problem with the background vocals being flown in, and when she wasn't singing because she was dancing so much. And that was the first time in my musical career. It's funny that this parallel thing happening where I was like, I get what that is. That's not Metallica live on stage. That's a whole universe of performers, singers, and dancers, and guitar players, and drummers. Like this massive thing. But it was super entertaining, and I had a really good time, even though I was totally not into that at the time. I knew the hits.
Right.
As like, the other thing as a young person back in that time, we all knew the hits of everything. Right. Whether you wanted to or not. You knew the new Puffy Jam. You knew the Janet Jackson, the Michael Jackson, the whatever it might have been.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so So my gig was like, that was my gig for Prince. And the dope thing was when he asked me to come out and do the first couple, it was like load the beats in for these 3 songs. And he wants you to add a little bit of extra stuff to it because he wants it to kind of sound like a remix when we perform live. So I basically had an open, like, clean slate, do whatever you want to these beats. And I would add like percussion or like put a different loop over top of it and stuff. And so I did the first 3, and then of course it's like come in after hours. They rehearse all day. You come in, do your thing, and then leave. And then the next day, the drummer calls me. He's like, "Yeah, he liked what you did. He wants you to remix everything in my rig."
I love how that just happens. You're like, "I'm just doing this thing. I'm not even sure."
Right.
And then because people know how notorious crazy Prince is about whatever he's, but when he likes something and he likes you, or you're in that fold, you're part of the soup,
right?
And you become part of this thing that's much larger.
Yeah. The crazy thing about my time with Prince was I was just 2 years but I was so young. I mean, I must have been like, I don't know, 20, 21, and it's like I ended up going. So eventually they asked me to go on the road with them and be like the electronic tech. Of course, I don't know shit about being a tech, like technically in terms of like if I need to solder something or whatever, you know what I mean? And they tried to get me to learn that, like some of the older techs on the crew. But then I remember this one dude took me aside. He's like, "Yo, if you don't want to solder, don't learn how to solder." You know what I mean? Like if you can't do it, don't worry about it. Like just don't. If you want to be a guy who fixes cables all your life, or you want to be a guy who programs beats. You know what I mean? And
yeah, that's some good advice right there. I mean, the funny thing is I know how to solder, but I get that point. I tell that to young musicians as well, especially when it comes to sound design, because a lot of I'll be teaching someone how to do production, and they'll get really held up on like some sort of sound design thing that they're working on, and I'm like, I don't really understand why we're spending so much time on this. Do you want to write songs or produce songs? Or you want to be a sound designer? I'm like, because there's dudes who just smoke weed making amazing sounds, but they can't write a song or make a beat to save their lives.
Right.
And I'm like, that's what they do. They're not going to be able to get past that. They know how to do all the patching. They know how to make all the crazy sounds. I'm like, it's not time well spent for you. And it's not time well spent for us right now. Like, I can teach you how to do that, but we're going to waste an hour so that you can learn how to modulate an envelope with an LFO. And like, I'm like, that's all cool. And like, I know how to do that. But I also have a rule about that stuff. Is like, find the sound that sounds almost like what you want before you start trying to bend it into, like I look at sound design, sound manipulation as like glass blowing. You can only go so far with it before it cracks, or it's just like turns into mush. Right. So you might as well start with something that has the form that you already want. And that's kind of like the same thing. I mean, I know how to do all the electronic stuff because I studied that in college, but that's a whole other... I always wanted to be a record producer, so like I kind of jettisoned that.
Right. Yeah.
So you're on the road, you're Prince's sound tech, you're basically doing programming.
The first tour I was just in charge of that electronic stuff. And I was sit by the rig on the side of the stage, and that was the whole thing. But then we go back to Paisley. And so, by the way Prince was working at that time period, he had a band on payroll, full all year round. And we would rehearse for like a year and then go out on tour for like a week and a half and then go back and just start rehearsing again. So that's how the band was so tight. And they'd rehearse a million songs so they could do all those after shows and like jam forever. But then when we went back to Minneapolis after that first tour, all of a sudden then I'm kind of part of the crew. And he started doing, I don't know if they were all free, but he started doing shows at Paisley Park every weekend, all the time. And like sometimes it would just be like, oh, we're having a party tonight. We're gonna play. Sometimes they would plan it ahead of time, but it was happening all the time. And Prince was notorious. He hated sound guys and guitar techs.
But I think everybody hates those people.
Probably. I feel like the guitar thing was kind of like don't touch my guitar sort of vibes. The sound thing was definitely like he could hear really well too. he did not like to be performing a song and could tell that somebody's EQing his vocal in the house. You know what I mean? He's like, I hear changes happening while I'm performing, because now I'm thinking about the fucking sound. Like, let me not deal with that. But so he was always firing sound guys, and I was the one guy on the backline crew that had studio experience, so I knew how consoles worked. And I just started mixing those shows. So there's a bunch of bootlegs from '95, and my real name's Mark. There's a bunch of bootlegs from '95 where he's like, Mark, turn up the drums and shit.
See, that's your other claim to fame. You smoked a bong on a little Kim record, and you're in the Prince live tapes.
He put me in a music video too it was like a VH1 special, where he did this song Days of Wild. It was like one of his rap songs at that time period. And I used to sit there at the board mixing, and I would like always just be bobbing my head, like getting into it, EQing, or not, not really changing a lot. But I was also, the reason he liked having me out there was because I'd been around. I knew when the guitar solos were coming up.
Right.
I knew, and I just knew, I don't know. I guess he just thought I knew what I was doing or whatever. But yeah, I would ride his guitar or whatever. But I would sit there and bob my head, and the console at one point was right next to the stage where like a monitor desk would be. It was running monitor and front of house. But one time I was sitting there and I was just bobbing my head. The band is jamming, and I look up there and I don't see him anywhere. And then I'm like, I feel this presence, and I look next to me, and there's Prince, like in sync with me, like just bobbing his head with me with like a lollipop. And he looked. I look over at him and I'm like, do I stop? And then, no, I didn't say that, but I'll be like,
I know.
I look over and he looks over and he just like gives me a thumbs up, goes back on stage or whatever. And then like the next week or so, or I don't know, sometime shortly after, we shot this music video for this song Days of Wild. It was a live performance, and they shot the main shots at a show, but then they did pickup shots the next day. So he called me and the drum tech, Magoo, up on stage, and he just wanted us to stand over there like between two of the musicians and just bob our heads. I mean, all of a sudden you got like a full-on film crew like shooting on film or whatever. And Prince standing there watching me, and I gotta bob my head on, like, that was wild too. But
he didn't bring you a plate of pancakes, did he?
No, we weren't like that. But
no, but you know what, everything you're like, I know from being on the road with, like, having people being on the road with you, when they're into it and they're losing themselves into the performance and they're part of what's going on, that becomes part of your, like, you probably at that moment touched him in a way was like, he's in here with me.
Yeah.
This is working. This dude doesn't have to be bobbing his head. He doesn't have to give a shit. I can just hire him like anybody else and fire him the next week. You're in there having a good time. You're fine. You're paying attention. You're in the jam with the dude. The reason why you know where the guitar solos are, it's because you're listening and paying attention. Right. There's nothing worse than an engineer who's not paying attention to what's going on or doesn't know, like, this is where Prince is going to go into his rap about this, whatever, blah, 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 and I should change X, Y, and Z. And the light, like the lighting guy, good lighting people will start to follow the performance. Even though you rehearse something, they start to key into these things depending on the size of the space, right? And you're that kind of guy. You're a thoughtful producer, you're interested in what you're doing. You're not doing something because it's boring, right? So that doesn't surprise me at all, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I just like the vision of you and Prince hanging out and he's got a lollipop in his mouth.
I know that we're getting close to the end of the time, but I feel like what you just described, that could be said for everything I've done. I mean, not everything, but most of the big jobs I've had in my life, I'm into it. The Puffy stuff, yeah, the music wasn't exactly the kind of hip hop I was listening to at the time, but there still was Black Rob. You know what I mean? There was still, the ghost of Biggie was still around. We were still sampling Biggie, and actually I worked on the posthumous Born Again album. I did some cuts on that. Yeah, so I mean, and now my job now, which is in advertising, and I'm editing video and also doing music stuff. The same thing, man. I'm not doing Charmin commercials, We're working on, like, brands that I fuck with. And everything I'm working on right now, well, the stuff I worked on the last 2 weeks is, like, so Black Lives Matter, I can't even believe that we're talking to brands about using this content. Like it's not middle of the road content. It's very cutting edge, pushing the envelope. The music is always, cutting edge and has to be dope. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like I'm super lucky to be able to work with people like Puff and Prince, but also like, I worked on I worked on the Made in America Music Festival. I was part of the team that helped launch that whole thing, with Jay-Z and Budweiser. So,
I mean, I think that that's the path that you have is very similar to my path in the sense of like, you find a way in with a little hole in there, you wiggle your finger around, it gets a little bit bigger, it gets a little bit bigger. The next thing you know, you're taking on the thing because they don't have, and you're moving on and you're helping develop projects, and you become pinnacle to those projects because you bring an expertise and an energy that becomes infectious because people want to be around good energy, especially in a creative business, especially with a lot of people who aren't really creative.
Right.
I had people throughout my whole entire career who still call me because I did something for them like 15 years ago, and I'm the guy who made like that thing happen. I was just thinking about you the other day. I had this project. I don't know anyone else to call.
Yeah.
Like this music supervisor called me a year and a half ago to work on. He was working on a TV show called Break Karate, and they had hired some really hip producers to do the soundtrack, and it was basically like an 80s and 90s hip-hop soundtrack. The idea was like different genres of music battling hip-hop, original hip-hop, and it was like a VH1 MTV type show where the guys would like yacht rock would battle hip-hop, and then like disco would battle hip-hop, and there would be these dance break-offs, whatever. Anyway, they had hired somebody to do the music, and it just didn't. They paid the big dollar for the hip act that didn't just work. It was like not working out. He called me out of the blue and he's like, I know you're the only person. Like, I literally know that you can do this no matter what. Do you want to do this? We negotiated the whole thing, but it was super fun to do the project. And I used the Roland cloud library, and I just limited all of my instruments to the Roland cloud. I was like, I'm only going to use 808, 909, Juno 106, like all the stuff from back in the day. I was like, if I just use only this stuff, it's going to sound like all the stuff that we were supposed to do. And I went through each thing, like, the stuff that sounded like Stetsasonic and, Beastie Boys and Wu-Tang. And, I would do like 5 songs that sounded like this and 5 songs that sounded like this. All right, we have 2 minutes left. Okay. I knew this was going to fly by. Every time I want to talk, like, we could do this for hours. All right, ready? No. Faith or science?
Both.
Rave or festival?
Festival.
Ocean, lake, or desert?
Is that 3?
Ocean, lake, or desert?
3 different things. I'm going to go with lake.
What's your superpower?
Quality control.
How would you incorrectly describe your job?
He's just a video editor.
What animal should survive if only one can survive?
Capybara.
Cat or dog?
Cat.
If not music, then what? Well, you're actually doing video, so.
Yeah, but... Yeah, okay. Video, sure.
Favorite meal?
Favorite meal? Woo. Wow, do I have a favorite meal? Right now, I'm just, it's street food, but I love the Chinese baos.
Hunter or gatherer?
Gatherer, I guess.
What's the last gift you gave someone?
I just bought somebody a crazy Chelsea Market gift basket, like $400 crazy food basket.
Okay, last question, because what genre are the Talking Heads?
Art.
Fafu, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You gotta stay connected.